Alright, so I have a blitz game to share with everyone. This is a really exciting game, a bit different than my usual. For those who have been following my channel, I'm currently over 2100 in rapid. My blitz rating, however, is only in the 1700s. But here's an interesting challenge for you. Try and guess my opponent's rating. Then try and estimate what my rating should be in this game as well. There's definitely a bit of a twist at the end, so let's take a look at it. Now I put the computer analysis on. We're going to kind of breeze through this game very quickly and then get to the end. I'm skipping this extremely quickly because this is all well-known theory, nothing really too special. And now in this opening, one of the main moves for white is to go knight d2 to try and control e4 and prevent my knight from hopping in. In the game, my opponent played rook e1, and so because of that move doing nothing to really stop knight to e4, I thought I would just hop in right away. They decide to trade and then hop back to kick my rook. I'll just decide to retreat. The game continues. They get the queen off the back rank. I try and improve my knight. And then here comes really the first key move, I thought. This pawn is kind of annoying on the queen side. It's not really too fun to try and gain queenside space with these pawns. And the center is kind of blocked up as well. So my king is safe enough. Let's play on the king side. The computer doesn't like that move as much. They prefer to play on the queen side. But alright, this is how it went. Game continues. And then I go for a b5. They go en passant. And then soon after they made, I think, the mistake of knight to f5. Now that these queenside pawns have recently gained space with b5, I'm looking to add to this space advantage, as Jeremy Silman talks about in his chapter on space and how to reassess your chess. So I'm happy to take the knight, push my pawn, and then they try and annoy me, so I want to trade off that rook. They push. Alright, it's a blitz game, fine, we'll open up both kings. But now I'm a little bit worried for my own king, so I really want to trade off queens. I try and trade again. This time I get them to accept it. And now we're going into an endgame. I feel like I'm slightly better here. The game continues. I really just want to keep my bishop anchored to this pawn, then I don't have to worry about either of them in time trouble, potentially. I move my rook behind the pass pawn. Slowly bring my king up. Breeze through the endgame moves here. And I'm just slowly trying to advance my king. They give a random check, I have to come back. They move back. But now rook to c3. I return my king back to d4. And now my king gets dangerously close to theirs. They retreated their rook back, and then they fell for this checkmate. Alright, now you're probably wondering what the twist was. That looked like a pretty standard game. We'll go through it, take your time. In fact, pause this video, write in the comments what you think their rating is. And bonus points if you can tell me what you think I played like. I think this game will surprise a lot of people. Alright, so now for the grand reveal. Unfortunately, I cannot take credit for this game. Let me put up the real players who played this. Yep, that's right. This is two grandmasters playing in Title Tuesday. Now hang on, I've got a reason. Be honest, and if you wrote down the comments, then thank you for writing it down and making it really concrete. Now there's no sugarcoating. Both of these players are extremely high rated. If you guessed much lower than this rating, it's really a combination of two things. One, these players are much higher rated than us and probably understand chess. Well, not probably, they do. Understand chess much better than we do. The second reason is the purpose of this video, and that's the chess.com computer, or really any chess computer for that matter, can be a bit misleading in their game report. So let's go through this game a bit more thoroughly, and you'll see why the GM playing the white pieces had 8 mistakes, and the GM playing the black pieces had 3 mistakes, plus 1 and 2 missed wins respectively. Alright, so this part I did tell the truth with. All of this is theory. Going a little bit slower here. This is a mainline Benoni. It's also a Catalan at this point. But let's not focus on the transpositional details. I'll let both sides develop and castle. And now here, this looks like a standard position you'd see in really any kind of Benoni formation. We've got the fianchetto bishop for black, a half-open file to work with, and if possible, you might even convert this into kind of a Spanish Benoni pawn structure with a6 and b5. And then this pawn structure is almost always good for black. One of white's main ideas is to try and get this pawn to e4. They don't want this pawn to become a target by my rook, and grabbing the center while they can is a really helpful idea. Now after these moves here, I did comment that knight to d2 was a main move, and that is indeed true. That's only half true. Sorry for deceiving you people here. Bishop f4 was the other idea, targeting this backwards pawn. In which case, we would probably continue with a6 and try and play for b5 if allowed. So playing knight e4 yourself simply denies white from playing it. And so now the recapture. We still haven't gotten to any mistakes yet. And so here comes the first inaccuracy of the game. And really it's problematic when a lot of people look at this move and go, oh, that's a bad move, and then you just judge it too easily. Be honest, remember the ratings were probably a lot lower than what you suspected. Blitz rating thrown in there kind of threw you off, but nevertheless the move should be the same value regardless of what level a player plays it. So why am I not so quick to judge knight to d2, other than the fact that the player has a GM title? Okay, so now we have to get to the conversation of centipawns. So that literally means 1/100th of a pawn. See, a computer, as good as it is, can't really think like a human. It just evaluates a bunch of lines really far, and then it adds an evaluation at the end of every single line. It chooses the one that it believes is best, labels it the best move, and then it chooses all the other variations to be blunders, mistakes, inaccuracies, etc., simply because of how many centipawns worse than the main move it is in its evaluation. At the depth I have right now, this move is 19 centipawns in white's favor. The best move, bishop g5, according to the engine, is 53 centipawns. That's fairly significant from a computer standpoint, and that's why I evaluated this move as inaccurate, because it's that much farther worse than the main move that it gave. But notice, we're only talking about 3/10 of a pawn. Even if you're GM level, I don't know how much you're worrying about 3/10 of a pawn. Humans don't really think in those terms. Now okay, with the rook under attack, of course it has to retreat back. And now the computer is not critical of this move, a4 is the best move according to the engine. But now knowing what I shared about the Spanish Benoni pawn structure, we see the idea of a4. Both players I'm sure are familiar with this setup, and white is trying to deter black from playing their pawn to b5. This is just a developing move, and once again we have an inaccuracy according to the computer. Now why is this move inaccurate? Well, it's only because the best move is rook to a2. Who would find that move? Sure, if you studied this line, then maybe you would know that. But if you really wanted to get out of the scope of the bishop, wouldn't it make more sense to simply play rook to b1? At least then you're supporting the pawn from behind. Okay, look, I'm not an opening expert. Maybe the computer's evaluating long term, this bishop might come here and then harass the rook. But in that case, you have pawn to e4 to try and deter it. See, I think a lot of players are getting too caught up in the subtleties of engine analysis, and you're using the engine to think for you. I love using the post-game analysis for learning, but you don't want the computer to be clouding your judgment, or worse, basically telling you what moves are best, and then you just kind of parrot an explanation based on whatever the computer tells you. Yes, it is okay to challenge the computer at times, especially when it's only an inaccuracy. Maybe mistakes and blunders the computer is usually correct, but even then investigate those lines and try and understand why it believes the best move is the best move. On a similar topic to all of this Centipawn analysis, if you want to learn about the truth of the chess.com game report, also known as CAPS, you can take a look at this chess video here. But alright, let's just continue with this game. Once again, they played a5, I believe is a completely solid move. Rook b8, trying supporting b5. And now an inaccurate move. Again, completely normal bringing it off the back rank. Seems like a pretty safe move. I'm not really sure why the computer preferred knight e4, especially since it blocks the pawn we were trying to get there to begin with. But especially in a blitz game, I'm not going to worry about this too much. And so now here's the first real creative move here, pawn to g5. See, I really like Wesley So's attacking spirit here. Yes, they are advancing a pawn in front of their king, and yes, the computer doesn't love it, but once again, why is this move a mistake? Well, let's go back here. The top engine move is pawn b6. And by the way, pawn b5 has the exact same evaluation. Obviously, both lines are looking at en passant, so it really wouldn't matter. But they're trying to get this formation. Now, how much worse is it exactly that there was g5 played instead? Once again, we're only talking about 3/10 of a pawn. I guess in this case, barely enough to be considered a mistake, whereas before it was an inaccuracy. Now following up by defending that pawn makes a ton of sense, secure your extra kingside space, but once again calls it a mistake, and this time for the exact same move, pawn to b6. You see, the computer's flaw with using that Centipawn evaluation is that when it's in a closed position or something really positional, the computer is very generous with this game report. Because there aren't really bad moves in the position. Usually just slow maneuvering, small little details, and the exact moves don't have to be that precise. It's more about having a plan and trying to relocate your pieces. And open positions, on the other hand, are very tactical situations. Like, for example, when your king is sitting out in the open. Well, in those positions, the computer is a lot more critical because there tends to be only one or two really precise moves. And oftentimes one move much better than the others. So if you miss that one move, even if you play the second best move, the computer is going to be a lot more critical of it. I like to think of myself as more of a positional player, and in my games, I'll usually have about 80% accuracy in the game. I've seen grandmaster games sometimes in the 60%, but I look at those and see just how much better those quality of games are to mine. To no surprise, it again has to do more with the position and less so with actually how well they did. Alright, this move is considered a missed win. F4 was apparently taking the advantage, but again, knight F1 has a lot of common sense to it. They simply wanted to move the knight so they could develop their bishop, and they didn't want to trade knights. So knight to F3 was out, and they didn't want knight B3 because that walks into pawn C4. Now both sides begin playing really well according to the computer, simply for the fact that it played the idea it wanted to play. B6 or B5. Now black follows up with B5, again the computer's praising this, oh it's the best move. And now knight F5, a very human move, you're targeting the backwards pawn. But maybe there is some truth to what I said, that you do potentially gain some queenside space. Now ironically enough, my explanation was a human one, perhaps not entirely correct. We would have to talk to a 2700 plus player to try and understand the ideas and depth of pawn B4. I believe it's probably as simplistic as I said, but once again, what do I know? I'm only 1700 blitz. The computer liked rook e3, kind of unintuitive once again, keeping this pawn that wanted to advance blocked behind your rook. Now I will say one benefit of having the rook in front of this pawn is maybe you don't actually want to advance this pawn at all. Perhaps in the opening it was good to try and grab some of the center, but now that this bishop is fianchetto, they have weak light squares because of the pawn formation with the squares in blue. And so because of that, white's light squares, highlighted in red here, are weak. So to just try and add a little extra support to the weak f3 square, this pawn may actually want to stay on e2. I guess the computer probably thought that and played rook e3 to try and add pressure to the center. But once again, I say thought, but again, computers don't really think. But okay, here we have human players, and with that human approach, wanting to trade off this rook, again targeting the backwards pawn. And so what was better than rook a8? Apparently it was pawn b3. I'm assuming to keep this pawn blocked and keep this bishop tied down to defense. Maybe discovered attacks from this knight moving and then attacking the pawn. Again, just human reasoning here. So after the rook trade, we have the computer still claiming pawn f4 is the best move, and so h4, the wrong pawn lever according to the computer, and that's why I say mistake. Now to be fair, this move is actually worse by a fairly significant amount compared to f4. See, in the game it allows the trade, and then queen c8 and black is doing well. Now remember, the game did go this way, but it was incorrect to try and pursue the queen trade. Before we get to that, let me show why f4 was better. I'm not saying the computer is always wrong, in fact it's probably correct most of the time, but I don't want people to blindly never challenge the computer and not think for yourselves. Now after this trade, and capturing back, black's best move would be knight g6. Queen c8 would be a mistake. Actually the computer's more critical, calls it a blunder, because of course white would trade queens, and then capture the hanging knight. I guess I could have explained all of that by just saying h4 doesn't attack the knight, but I thought I had a little more clarity if I would actually put it on the board. Okay, now back to the queen c8 move we looked at. As mentioned, we do not pursue this move. Now it's important to note, black is still winning, and from a human perspective, especially at the GM level, black has the better endgame and should win. So of course exchanging queens just simplifies. Makes things a lot easier. Computers don't have feelings. Computers also are not going to slip up under time pressure. So computers, being really fighting, wants to play pawn to h5. Exposing their king even more, yes, but then wanting this, so if the queens trade, now the knight recaptures with a little support from the pawn. Technically not an outpost because pawn to f3, but apparently the pawn on h5 is helpful. Now as mentioned, black is completely winning here. The strongest move according to the computer was bishop d4, with a double attack on this pawn. If they block with pawn e3, then you just go back to c3 attacking the rook. And there the engine says black is about -2. That's basically being up 2 pawns, and when material is equal, that is a pretty sizable advantage. Of course, this move here, the missed win, is better than 1 pawn in black's favor according to the computer. I've got -1.03 here, and so once again, at this level, 1 pawn in evaluation is enough. So the game continues. c4 was nice because now it creates a passed pawn. They capture. Knight captures. By the way, pawn to b3, as I put with the arrow, was a good alternative, but Wesley So choice is a little bit stronger. White plays here and allows the doubled pawns. The endgame continues. And now I just want to talk a little bit about this move, because this is really exciting. I am almost out of my seat here, because they choose to move the rook away from this pawn. To me, this looked like it was a target. The doubled pawn is a weakness, but it is also defended by the bishop. The king is probably going to come up, and there isn't really progress to be made. And this is what Wesley So noticed in a blitz game. It's stronger to bring the rook behind your passed pawn, and your king can come up here. That doubled pawn is not going anywhere. It is a static weakness. Okay, now both players come up with their kings in the endgame. King to e3 was a smidge better, but now this is where the computer starts to kick in that endgame grind. Rook to a8 and then trying to go to a3 and exchange off rooks was more simple for the engine. A bit unusual that you want to trade rooks there because opposite colored bishops, which would be remaining after the rook trade, tend to be a draw. But I guess in this case, even though it's equal material, the white pawn structure and probably black's more active king means that black is winning that pawn endgame. Of course, the human perspective is just continue bringing your king up towards the center. And after a little bit of jousting around, probably part of the time pressure, they begin shuffling pieces in a roughly equal position. King d3 would have kept the game on. King b5 is a fighting chance to try and win, but now the key move here is rook to c3, trying to force the trade of rooks, when the recapture would make this pawn too strong. The position repeats one time here, then Wesley So finds the move, and now it's easy converting from here. Computer calls this a mistake, but I mean, come on, from the human perspective, everything was already lost. Computer claims pawn e5, just throwing away a pawn. Yeah, that's just trying to delay the inevitable checkmate. In this miserable position for white, the best move according to the computer is to just trade rooks, which is probably the worst move you could possibly play as a human, because that just gives black the chance to get this strong pass pawn, and you literally cannot stop this from queening. But the computer is probably sensing checkmate far enough, and just thinks that delays it longer. Yeah, from a human perspective, human players might slip up, so you want to keep rooks on the board and make them prove the win. Have them try and advance their pass pawn, and maybe you can trick them in that endgame. Now, unfortunately, the human intuition fails in this case only because of a mate in 1, which was probably under time pressure. But I don't fault the instincts. White's instinct to move the rook away was indeed correct. I mean, both lines were losing, so you might as well play the one that gives you more practical chances. Yeah, okay, sure, in this position it was mate in 1. Of course both players would have avoided that if they had seen it. But in many positions, you want to give the opportunity to the opponent for them to go wrong. So once again, don't let the computer replace your ability to think for yourself. Yes, it's a good tool to use, but without counting Centipawns, let's try and understand the moves that we play, and hopefully we'll find the best moves along the way. Thanks for stopping by, everyone. I'll see you in the next chess video.